Welcome back to Building Websites with Python Django. Hopefully, if you decided to partake in a little bit of food that you enjoyed, whatever it is that you ate, I know we did. In case you're just tuning in, where have you been all day? No, but seriously, in case you're tuning in, again, this is Building Websites with Python Django. That's Susan Ibach. I'm Christopher Harrison. And we spent our morning going through the basics of Django. We did kind of a high-level overview. And then Susan did a couple of fantastic demos and walked everybody through how the ORM layer works inside of Django. Now it's my turn to babble on for a little while, and we're now going to get kind of more into the webby side of things. And we're going to start that off by taking a look at URLs and routing.
And if you did miss anything we covered in the earlier module, I saw a couple of questions in the Q&A, something really good for you to know. These videos will all be recorded and available about 2 weeks after the live date. So yes, you will be able to access anything you missed later and go back and look at it later if, due to time zones or whatever, you weren't able to catch absolutely everything.
Thank you for pausing for me so I can get one last drink of water.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the concept of routing and what that's all about, which, as you're going to see, is going to lead us into regular expressions, and then we'll figure it all out, finish it all out, talking about configuring routing in Django. But first up, let's talk a little bit about routing. So in the days of yore, when it was still things like Link and Netscape Navigator and all of those good old days. If you wanted to navigate to a particular page, save generally speaking for just whatever the root domain is, like www.microsoft.com. What you wound up doing was you wound up calling a specific file. So for example, you might go to http://www.contactus.html. And so that would go ahead and give you that static HTML file. Or maybe you were going to call something that was going to be dynamic. So maybe it was doing CGI, or it was going to be doing Perl. So it might be, for example, www.contoso.com/createaccount.pl. But the one thing that's common between those two is it's still going to be saying, I want that specific file. Well, what happens if maybe you change technology? Or let's kind of go one step further with this, is let's say that we want to be able to pass additional information to that file. So maybe we've got www.contoso.com/details.asp, going kind of real old school there, album ID equals 42. The one thing that all of those URLs have in common is that, frankly, they're all bad. Because first of all, a lot of those URLs just don't look really good. Nobody cares. Nobody cares about the extension. Nobody cares if you're using HTML or if you're sending down XML in a style sheet or nobody cares.
It should be transparent to the user.
Exactly.
The user shouldn't need to know whether you're exactly using HTML or ASP. They just want to go to a website.
Exactly. Yeah. So nobody cares. On top of that, when you take a look at something like album ID equals 42, what's 42? I mean, besides the answer to the ultimate question of life, the universe, and everything, what's 42? I don't know, you don't know, and search engines don't know. So what we want is we want something that's going to be a little bit clearer to the user. On top of that, if you're pointing to a specific file, what happens if that file location changes? Or maybe you change the technology that you're using on the server. Well, you're pointing at a specific file, so now you're going to have to figure out how to reroute everything. And I've got better things to do with my time. I know you've got better things to do with your time. It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So we want the URLs to look good. Now, you still might be thinking, well, wait a minute, why do I care what the URL looks like? What do I care about a vanity URL? Yeah.
Why do I care what the URL looks like?
I'm glad you asked. So the reason that you care is because a vanity URL is going to make it easier for a user to figure out what it is that they're about to see. So when I look at this URL, I have no idea what I'm about to get. I know I'm going to get details, and I'm probably going to get an album, but that's really the extent of it. But if I saw a URL that looked like this, www.contoso.com/album/wish, I've got a very good idea that I'm going to be looking at albums, and I'm probably going to see something called wish. That's what I'm going to wind up seeing. So it's much easier for me to see as the user, but here's another big thing.
Oh, and that's, we want to talk about one of the things that anybody, when you're working for companies and startups and you're trying to build websites, something they're always talking about is how do I do search engine optimization and how do I do things to maximize the chance of my website coming up in search results? If that comes up, it's a really important thing.
Whenever I'm teaching a web class at an in-person event, the two questions that I always get asked, number one is some form of a performance question. So it could be, is this going to slow things down? How can I make it go faster, et cetera? And the second question is about search engine optimization. And tell you what, I'm going to answer both of those questions in one fell swoop. Are you ready? Just go with best practices of just general coding. That's really it. So first of all, when it comes to performance of code, generally speaking, the code that's the easiest to read is the code that's going to execute the fastest. And on top of that, even if it might not be, like somebody asked in the Q&A window earlier, which was a great question, was, hey, if I'm using this ORM, is that going to be slower than doing a direct SQL query? And the short answer to that question is yes. But it's going to be so negligible that honestly, it really isn't going to matter. And that little bit of a performance hit that you're going to take can be overcome by hardware. So I don't know about you, Susan, or anybody else that's watching, but of all the projects that I've ever worked on, of the two, which was more important, time to market or performance, every single project I've ever worked on, save for one, it was time to market. It was all about, I want this right now. And that's not to say that performance isn't important. It is. We all know that it is. Mm-hmm. But if we have to choose one or the other, time to market or performance, time to market is always going to be more important. And you know what? Again, if you're just writing good code, you can get that performance that you want by just adding more RAM, adding more CPUs, spinning up another server, sliding the little bar over on Azure to just spin up another instance, and away you go from there. Kind of parallel to that, about search engine optimization, how do we make our site better optimized for search engines? Again, it's all about following those best practices. So for example, if you're going to put an image out there, best practice is to add on an alt attribute. Why? Well, because it makes it more accessible for the general public. Screen readers now know what it is, but on top of that, a search engine is now going to know what it is. So if the user can figure out what it is, a search engine is going to be able to figure out what it is. So when I see album ID equals 42, I have no idea what that is, and the search engine isn't going to know. But if we see Wish on there, now we know exactly what that is. We know that that's going to be the name of the album, and so our search engine is going to be able to pick that up. So how does this relate back to our discussion of the uses of routing? Well, again, we don't want our users to request a specific Python file because it's not going to be a specific Python file that they're going to be calling. Eventually, it's going to be a method, as we're going to see in a little while. What we really want is those users to request a resource or an action, and then we'll figure out what code it is to execute on the back end. So what we need to do is we need to explain to Django, hey, if you see a URL that has that structure, what we want to do is call this code. That's what we're going to be doing here. But we've got a little bit of a problem. That if we break down this URL, AdventureWorks, I was using Contoso earlier, but whatever it is, this www.adventureworks.com, that's going to be static. That's going to be a string literal. That's going to stay right there. Albums, we can basically treat like a keyword. That's going to be static. That if I want to bring up something about an album, it's going to be www.whatever.com/albums. That's not going to change. But you know what is going to change? Is Wish. That's what's going to change, because the name of the album is going to change. So it could be Wish, it could be Disintegration, it could be Staring at the Sea. You know, it's going to change at the very end. So what I need to be able to explain to Django is, hey, look, all of this, let me kind of clear my screen. This part right here, that's going to be static. But this part right here, this is going to be dynamic. So if you see albums and then you see something here, this is the code that I now want you to execute. Or to try and put that a little bit simpler, what I really want to do is I really want to be able to explain to Python what the patterns are going to look like. And again, that's where routing comes into play. So when we see that, let's go ahead and call that details method, because at the end of the day, that's what our Python is going to call. OK. Now, I'm going to leave that slide up there for about 5 more seconds, or apparently not. There we go. Sorry, Danny, I'm just going to throw you under the bus there. There's the sort of propeller head technical stuff.
That's a pretty scary looking slide.
Yeah, there it is. OK,
moving
on.
Good old root URL conf.
So let's go ahead and talk about how we're going to manage those patterns. So patterns are going to be matched up by utilizing regular expressions. Now, if you haven't used regular expressions in a little while, that's what we're now going to introduce. So Django uses those regular expressions for those patterns. And a regular expression, sometimes known, by the way, as a Perl regular expression, same thing, is a way of describing a pattern. So we know we're going to have that / albums, / and then something afterwards. And that's what a regular expression allows me to do, is it allows me to say, hey, the text is going to look like this. And we can actually get really complicated with this. We can get very simple. Maybe it's just a specific word. We can say, hey, we only want numbers. Or we could get something like, hey, we're going to have 3 letters followed by 2 numbers.
Right. So if we're expecting like an account number, we might say it should only be numbers. Or if we're expecting a name, then we might only say letters. Or if there's certain specific formats we expect, we can be really specific about what's an acceptable URL.
Exactly. So the basics of a regular expression. Now, I will always remember there was an O'Reilly book on regular expressions. And it was roundabout like that thick. I want to say literally this thing was like 700-800 pages on regular expressions. Our modules on MVA typically are around 50 minutes, and I'm looking at my clock right now, and it says that I've got 37 minutes and 39 seconds to get through the remainder of not only just regular expressions, but a couple of other things. So needless to say, why is it that people say needless to say and say it anyway? Needless to say, and I'm going to say it anyway, we're not going to get into everything about regular expressions. Now, the good news about regular expressions is there's this old 80-20 rule that 80% of the time you use 20% of the features. I think with regular expressions, it's basically a 95-5 rule. That 95% of the rule you use about 95% of the time, you use about 5% of the features. And so that's what I'm going to focus my attention on, is really just kind of those core little things that you want to be able to know, and then hopefully point you out a couple of resources from there. So let's get into the basics. So
I'll just add one thing.
Yeah.
I'm the lazy coder. When it comes to regular expressions, a lot of times, I mean, it'll be things like email addresses, postal codes, phone numbers, and things you're trying to represent. Usually, if you go and do a quick search on the web.
Steal my thunder.
Oh, am I stealing your thunder?
You're stealing my thunder.
Yeah, trust me, there's some stuff out there that's going to help you. You don't need to memorize everything about regular expressions.
Don't steal my thunder.
There are things that will help you.
Okay.
And Christopher may have some ideas on that.
Hey! All right. So in any event, let's go ahead and kind of get rolling on working with our patterns here. So the first thing, if we're going to be working with a regular expression and trying to match some pattern, we may need to be able to say, well, I know it's going to start with this, or it's going to end with this. And that's where these two little characters come into play, the caret and the $sign, that the caret means that it has to start with whatever we're going to be providing. And then the $sign means that it must end with whatever it is that we're going to be providing. So the caret is start, and then the $, means that it's going to end with that. So, for example, let's go ahead and take kind of a very simple little thing. So here's my expression. And so my expression is simply the letters CONTACT. So simply contact. And that's it. That's my expression. In regular expressions, if you just type out certain letters, what you're saying is those are the letters that I need to see. So if I just type out the letters CONTACT, that's all that needs to be there. I'm just saying, hey, I just need to see those letters. Now, you'll notice if we go back to the expression that there's no special characters here. There's nothing in front of that or nothing at the end of it. So what this means is that somewhere inside the text, needs to exist in order the letter C-O-N-T-A-C-T. And you'll notice that if we take a look, if this is our text of contact us, contact exists, and so this is a match. So it doesn't contain that dollar or that caret, so it matches because contact wasn't anchored, meaning that it could be anywhere inside the word. Let's change things a little bit. How about if we put a dollar sign at the beginning there? So we've got our dollar sign at the very beginning, so what that means is that it has to start with those letters. We didn't say anything about the end, but it has to start with those letters. So once again, if we go ahead and we take a look, you'll notice that sure enough, it starts with those letters, so we're good. Well, what would happen if we put a caret at the end? Well, now what we're doing is we're saying it has to end with those letters. And if we take a look, of course, at our contact us, it ends with the letters US. That, again, does not match. So if we have the caret, it means that it has to end with contact. So this does not match because it does not end with those letters. And if we kind of keep on going, we've got a dollar US. Of course, that's not going to match because it doesn't start with US. Now, if I had left off that dollar, that would work.
Yep.
Or if I had said US and then a caret, that would work.
Because then it ends with the US letters. Yeah.
Exactly. But because of the fact that we had the dollar at the beginning, it doesn't start with US, so it's not going to match. And in fact, I do have the slide on the US with the caret. If we've got that, then it will, in fact, match. And just to close the entire thing out, you'll notice that you can say, well, I want it to start and end with those letters by using the dollar and the caret. And again, it doesn't match because we still have that us at the end. Cool. All right. And there's with the full contact us. I've got a lot of examples in my slides here.
But it's one of those ones where when you see them after a while, you start to recognize the patterns and it becomes easier to work with it once you've seen a few examples. It really is the more you see them, the better you get at reading them. Yeah, one of the things that people will often ask when they first see regular expressions is just like Susan pointed out there, is how in the world am I ever going to understand all of this? And the answer really is, it's all about just, practice. Regular expressions, I think, have slightly more interesting, that's the word that I'm going to use, syntax than something like Python. But when you first learned Python, you might have been looking at it and you might have been going, I really don't understand what in the world def means and what in the world class means. But then after a little while and using it and so forth, you started to become a lot more comfortable with that. And now you really don't even think twice about it. And regular expressions are basically the same thing, is that you're probably going to look at this the first time, especially if you're brand new to regular expressions, and you're just going to go, okay, I don't quite get this. If you keep working at it, eventually it will start to all come together. Now, in the prior examples that we did, we were looking for a specific word. So I was specifically looking for contact, or I was specifically looking for contact us. But how about something that's truly a pattern? So maybe we've got something that's a SKU, or we've got something that's a phone number. And so what I need to make sure of is that we're looking for, something like a phone number. So like for a US phone number, we're going to have, of course, the 3 digits for the area code, 3 digits, a dash, and then 4 more digits. So how do I tell through regular expression that this is now what I want? So how about a true pattern? Well, what you're going to notice is that regular expressions actually gives us a lot of different ways that we can express a pattern. So for starters, you're going to notice the backslash, and the backslash is a very common escape character, and that's what it is in regular expressions, that a backslash lowercase d, so small d, means digit. Makes sense? Yep. And a backslash capital D means non-digit. And this is one little common pattern throughout regular expressions, is the lowercase letter means whatever it is that it's referring to. The capital letter means the opposite. So a lowercase d means digit, capital D means non-digit. And if we keep on keeping on, lowercase w means a word character, capital W means a non-word character. Now, that's what the W stands for. W is a word character. So what it means is an alphanumeric and an underscore. So that counts A to Z, both upper and lowercase. I didn't put the lowercase just, to keep the slide a little more compact.
but it is A to Z, both upper and lowercase. It's the underscore, but it's also 0 through 9 as well. And that can be a little bit problematic because there are going to be times when I want characters. I just want A to Z, but I don't want numbers. And maybe I don't want underscores. So how do I just make sure that I'm getting the letters A to Z and nothing else? Well, fortunately, you can actually create your own ranges. And you do that by using square brackets. Now, the thing about the way that the square brackets work, because it's a little bit funny when you first see it, is a square bracket and then some starting letter, let's just say A through, I don't know, R, for example. If you look at that, that sort of makes sense because I've got my square bracket, and as long as we just simply accept that that's a special character and that's what it's going to tell it, if I just simply said, hey, we need letters A to R, that would probably be how I'd write it right down there. So when we see this up here, that kind of makes sense. So we go, oh, okay, it's got to be somewhere between A and R. That's fantastic. Where things I think can get a little bit confusing is what happens if I just did this? And if you first look at that, you might think, well, that seems like it might just be a shortcut way to say, once again, A to Z. But it's not. If you list the letters off directly one after the other, like I did there, just AZ, what you've now said is that you can choose A or you can choose Z.
So
all the other letters, B through Y, trying to remember my alphabet, B through Y would not work there. So I said you could use A or you could use Z, but nothing in between. All right, now what happens, kind of going back to our word character, if you wanted just letters? Well, you can do that, but you just have to do that, quote unquote, manually. So what you wind up doing is simply saying A to Z and then A to Z. And you'll notice that I've just simply put both of those together just like that. So now it's A to Z lower and A to Z capital. And that will now give you all of the letters of the alphabet, including Z, for my Canadian friend. And by the way, if anybody's really curious, could I have done capital A, capital Z, and then lower AZ? Absolutely. It doesn't matter which order you list them.
You're just saying I've got two ranges of letters.
That's exactly what you're saying.
The uppercase range and the lowercase range.
That's exactly it. Yep. Okay. So if you want one letter, like A to Z, or if you want one digit, then all you have to do is just simply use the appropriate icon and away you go. So you want one digit, it's \D. What happens if you want two digits? Well, you can do that one of two ways. You could, if you wanted to, say \D, which would work fine, I guess, for two digits. But what happens if you want 10 digits? You're not going to go.
Starts to get hard to keep track of how many of them you've done.
One, two, three.
When you find yourself counting them, then you probably want to switch syntax.
Exactly. So the proper way really to do that is to use curly braces. And inside the curly brace, you're going to indicate the number of items that you want. Or if you want to create a range, so maybe I need between, say, 3 to 6 numbers, then you could just simply use curly and then 2 digits. So 1, 2, which would mean 1 or 2. And then you'll notice that you just specify the maximum and minimum. Now, where things get potentially a little bit confusing, and I've got a slide coming up that'll talk about this in just a moment, is this operator applies to what immediately precedes it, not to the entire range. And I'll get to that in just a moment. Okay. Now, how about if I just want 1 or more? That's a plus. If I want 0 or more, that's an asterisk. And if I just want to mark something as optional, then I use a question mark. And what's nice about things like the plus and the asterisk and the question mark is that those are very common in a lot of other places as well. If you're going to be doing some form of query and you're going to say, I want 1 or more or 0 or more, the plus, asterisk, and question mark are kind of common.
Yeah, and let's be clear, you're not going to memorize all of these from these slides in the time we're presenting them here. You're going to look these up when you need them. You're going to have a pattern you're looking for, and then you're going to go, oh, how do I search in a regular expression for range of letters, range of numbers, 1 or more numbers, 0 or more numbers, and you're going to look these up when you need them. This is just trying to show you the pure flexibility in a few examples. Right.
So let's get a little bit more advanced. So like I mentioned, the number modifiers, only apply to the item that comes immediately before it. So let's take, for example, that expression there. So I just simply have ASDF because my fingers were on the home row. And then I've got \D and then that curly to curly. This little operator that says to only applies to the item that comes immediately before it. So in other words, ASDF 42 matches because it's 2 digits. But if I said ASDF 42, ASDF 42, that does not match because the 2 does not apply to the entire thing. Here we go. Well, sort of. There we go. It doesn't apply to the entire thing, but rather it only applies to what immediately precedes it. So it's that \D that immediately precedes it, so it's only talking about digits. If you did in fact want a group, then you could go ahead and put that inside of parentheses. Okay, now I've got a couple more examples here that I'm going to show off in just a second, but what I want to mention before I get into that is kind of, again, one more time, that the goal of this is not to get into everything there is to know about regular expressions. Again, that would take a lot longer. And I've been sort of talking now, I'm trying to remember back to what the time said originally.
About 15 minutes.
Yeah, about 15 minutes I've been talking about regular expressions, and I've still got a couple more minutes to go. Nobody's going to be able to learn regular expressions in 20 minutes, but hopefully this will help point you down the right path, and that you'll start to at least see what the most common use cases are going to wind up being. So let's go back to our little example here, where I've got a bit of text over here. So album/with. So you'll notice that I'm kind of using more of a URL pattern. And what you'll notice is I've got my expression over here, and you'll notice that there's my expression. So I've got the dollar and I've got the caret, meaning that it has to start and end with that. I've got the hard-coded letters ALBUM/, and then right here I've got that A to Z plus. Now you'll notice that this is red, and red's of course kind of a nice indicator that this doesn't match. The reason that it doesn't match is because it's case sensitive. So you'll notice that I've got wish with a capital W. You'll notice that I said lowercase A to Z. So as a result, this does not match. Okay, well, what if I did want it to match? Well, I could go ahead and maybe write an expression that looks like that. But again, you're going to notice red. Why is it red? Well, the reason that it's red is because I said AZ, AZ. I didn't put in the dashes. So AZ, AZ is just going to be those 4 letters and only those 4 letters. So it's not going to be that range. Now, the reason that I started with those 2 as my examples is because these are going to be very common mistakes. So you might be thinking, well, it's case insensitive, A through Z, Bob's your uncle. Not so much. You might be thinking, well, let's just go AZ, AZ. Again, not so much. So the proper way to do it, is to go ahead and type out A to Z, A to Z. And so now this does, in fact, match. Cool. All right. Something else that you could also have done is you could have done the \W, which again does mean word characters. But the problem there is, remember what you're now saying. So if I kicked all the way back to about like 8 slides ago, one of the things that we would see is my word character not only includes A to Z, but it also includes numbers, and it also includes underscores. So if I'm talking about the name of an album, underscores probably not. Maybe numbers, but underscores probably not. And so as a result, you really need to make sure that you're very careful when building your expressions so that they're properly going to limit what the user has typed in. Now, I do have to confess real quick, Susan, that if we were going to make this a real music store and we wanted to make this for artists, that particular artist from Minnesota who for a little while had that unpronounceable symbol, I don't know how we would write a regular expression for that.
That one, exactly. You never know what's going to happen in the music world.
Exactly, yeah. All right. In any event, that joke was much funnier in my head. So how do we learn more about regular expressions? Well, honestly, it's all over the interwebs. Like Susan mentioned earlier, just fire up Bing, do a search for regular expressions, and you'll find all sorts of different items within about, I think, 30 seconds. I found dive into python3.net regular expressions.html. So go ahead and check that out. Any tips when creating them? There's a great little website, and it's a community website called regexlib.com. And what you'll actually find on there is all sorts of different regular expressions. So if you're looking for a phone number, if you're looking for a zip code or a postal code, if you're looking for email address, just head on over there, type whatever it is that you're looking for, and chances are you're going to find it. That there's a buddy of mine that likes to say, we're not launching rockets here. The point that he's making is that whatever it is that we're doing, somebody else has already done. So go ahead and just take advantage of something that somebody else built. I already mentioned the fact that you want to make sure that you've restricted the pattern enough. Now, the last thing specific to Django is this, is that Django is going to choose the first pattern that matches. So let's say that I wrote a pattern that looked like this, that I said $/album and left it like that. And then I wrote another one that said $/album/ and let's say backwards W plus. Where's my plus sign? Plus sign. There we go. OK. So let's say that I wrote those two patterns. This would actually pose a problem for me. And the problem is, first of all, that I should have used a caret. Let's try that again. Give me 1 second. See, we're really cooking on this show. There we go. Caret. And now let's go ahead and say albums like that. And then let's say I also said caret. There we go. And I said albums /back W plus. OK. So here's what these two expressions would mean. So the first expression says, hey, it has to start with /albums/. And the second one says, well, it has to start with /albums/, and after that, there needs to be word characters. The problem that I have is that this regular expression is going to match everything that the next regular expression is going to match. Because after all, I said it just simply has to start with it. I didn't say what would come after it. So it's not going to be based on what matches the closest. It's whichever one matches first. So you do have to be very careful when you get into configuring your routing. How about that for a segue?
Ta-dum. Well done, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. OK, so let's get in and actually do it. How do we actually add in our rules and our routes? Well, what you're going to do is you're going to list all your expressions inside of URLs py. Your default Visual Studio expression is going to have a whole set that you could go ahead and use. And here's the basic syntax. The basic syntax is whatever your regular expression is, whatever the destination method name is that you want it to call, the actual code, and then you can also give it a name if you so desire. Or to break this down a little bit further, that R, which has to be there, tells Python that a regular expression is coming. Then we have the regular expression that we want. And then the destination method is the one that we want it to match. And then, like we said, a name if we so desire, which can be very helpful for testing purposes later. Now, what happens if it has parameters? Well, we'll actually kind of come back to that in just a moment, but we will be able to also add in parameters. This is just going to be a little bit of syntax for that. OK, but first, let's go ahead and take a look at a basic URL. Now, when I'm doing my URLs, I generally like to just throw mine up at the top. That's just me. But again, you want to make sure that you are listing them in such a way that it's not going to accidentally match a later one. So you do need to be a little bit careful of that. So all that we need to do is simply say URL / paren R4 regular expression, single quote to start up a string, and then let's go ahead and create something for artists. So let's say that if you type in artists, that I just want to display all of the artists. And I'm going to go ahead and put the $ at the end there. I just want artists. That's it. And so we'll go ahead and just do that. And now it's going to be, well, where do we want to code? What code do we want to go run? Well, all of our code, and we talked about this in the morning, for our views is going to be typically inside of views.py, or at least for a very, very small application. You can create multiple files if you want. And so here is my little views.py file right here. And I'm going to actually clean up a couple of things. I was making sure everything was going to work earlier, so I added in a couple of things that I don't actually need right now. So I'm just cleaning those up. There we go. OK, so there's our views.py file. So this is actually where our code is going to go. So you'll notice right here that there's a method named home, right? Well, let's come back over here to urls.py. And just to get rid of the squigglies, if we take a look, that if you type in nothing after the domain, app, well, let's see, it's inside of a folder called app. Yep, OK. And views, well, it's inside of a file called views. We just identified that. And then you're going to notice that there's the name of the method, right? Home. So that's the method that it's now going to call. So what I'm eventually going to do here is I'm eventually going to create inside of app views a brand new method that I'm going to call artists. And that's what's going to display all of my artists. And let's give this a name of artists. There we go. Now, don't forget the comma at the end. Now, one very nice thing about creating all of this is that you're actually creating a collection of patterns. And you'll notice that you could actually, if you wanted to, end with a comma. So if you decide, hey, you know what, I really want all of mine down here at the end, and you're not sure about accidentally putting in one too many commas, that's OK. So every time that you add in a new pattern, just get yourself into that habit. Always put in that comma at the end. There we go. So there is for all of my artists. Now, one of the other things that we might want to be able to do here is we might want to be able to hand in a parameter. So maybe I want to be able to display an artist or an album based on their name, or maybe based on their ID, or whatever it is that it happens to be. Well, in that particular case, I need to add on a parameter for that route. And the way that we add on a parameter, and again, it's a little bit of I think, quirky syntax, but there it is we're going to, inside of our route, add in parentheses. We're going to kind of create a group. Question mark. That's what's going to tell it. Actually, question mark P is what's going to tell it that it's a parameter. This is eventually going to become the name of the parameter, and this is going to be the pattern. So if I wanted to be able to say, for example, album wish, there we go. If I want to be able to say album wish and have wish be passed into that method that we just talked about, this is what I would wind up doing. So this is the expression that's going to match that, and whatever the value is going to wind up inside of name. So if we kind of take a real quick look at that, let's come back over here to views, and hopefully this will bring it all together. Let me say def artist details like this, and let's say, for example, request and then name. So you'll notice that I'm just adding on a name. I really don't care what it's going to return. So anyway, so let's just go ahead and add that in. So request, as we're going to see in a couple of minutes, that's going to be the HTTP request object. So what the user has actually sent up. There's my parameter name. So that's what it needs to match. So I'm going to come back over here to URLs, and I'm now going to say URL r, just like before, and then we'll go ahead and say caret. I can never find that on the keyboard. Artists slash, and then in parentheses, question mark P name, again matching name. There we go. And then what I want my pattern to be. So let's say A to Z, A to Z, and let's add on a plus sign, paren, and let's close it out. And that's now going to go to app views, and what did I call it? Artist details? Yes. Artist details. OK. I have a great memory. It's just really short. Details. Thank you for laughing at that, Danny. There we go. And so now, if I just type in artists, that's going to give me all my artists. And if I type in artists / and I put something else at the end of it, that's now going to call that artist details method. Okay. Now you're probably looking at all of that and you're probably thinking, okay, I sort of get it. So I see that if the URL looks like this, I can tell it to point to that method. And if I see the URL looks like this, I can tell it to point to that method. But you know what I would really like to see? I would really like to see that in action. I would really like to see, well, you know, it called a method. I want to see something display on the screen. This is a web development class. Show me something in a browser. Okay, fine. We'll show you something in a browser. So let's go ahead and execute code for the user. So again, at the end of the day, the user is simply calling a method. So as a result, all we need to do is create a method for the user to call. And we actually just covered what that method needs to look like. So it's going to be the name, has to be a request object. And that, again, is going to be the request object that's coming back from the user. So this is what the user actually sent up via the browser. And then those optional parameters. So we can have name inside of there, or ID, or whatever else it is that we might want that we just saw. And then, in order to send something back, the simplest way to do it is just to send back an HTTP response. And so you could actually just build up the full HTML, and away you go. Or if you wanted to send back a not found, then you could even send back a not found error message. So let's go ahead and actually add that in, shall we? Let's actually see something displayed out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here to my code, and let's go ahead and add in artists. So just to kind of highlight that once again, there's our artists, and we're going to call @viewsArtists, right? So I'm going to come back over here, and I'm going to go ahead and say def artists, and I'm going to say request, and let's go ahead and say return, and we want that HTTP response. It's not imported by default, so I just need to add that in, HTTP response, and let's go ahead and say return HTTP response, HTML, head, title, hello, Django. We have to do hello, Django, right?
It took us till module 4 to get around to doing our hello world. I can't believe it.
I blame myself.
Yeah.
H1, hello, Django, close H1, close body, and close HTML. Okay.
If you got all that right in the first try, I'd be very impressed.
Thank you. All right, there we go. And let's go ahead and do something like this. I'm going to sort of cheat a little bit here. There we go. And let's go ahead and say output equals, there we go, and
so we're putting it all together now. We've defined in the routing, you know, how do we know which URL calls which method, and now we're defining within the methods what to display to the user when those methods are called.
Exactly. Yep. And I'm just kind of building this up across a couple of lines there. So what I'm actually doing on this little method here is I am going to take whatever name it is that you've provided and echo that back out to the screen. That's all that I'm doing there. So you give me the name, and I'm just going to display that back out. And again, I'm building up this HTML dynamically. Not really the best way to build web pages, obviously, but it's going to be perfect for our little proof of concept. OK. Now, I'm going to build all of this. Just click Build and Build Solution. And I could, if I wanted to, hit play, and that would launch the debugger, and that would launch Internet Explorer, and all that good stuff. But the way that I like to do my development is I like to actually just right-click on the project, go to Python, and then choose Start Server. Or if you did want to attach a debugger, you do have attach Start Debug Server. But I'm just going to Start Server. And this will actually automatically set up a little server here for me on, come here, Mark. There we go. 127.0.0.1, so localhost, port 8000. And then what I could do is just navigate on over, and voila, there is my brand new Django site. Now, what I love about this is that server is going to be dynamic. So if I make a change to a Py file and I save it, I come back here, I hit refresh, it works. It runs that code. So I love that back and forth, that the changes that I make are available to me almost instantaneously. I really like that way of doing development because, I mean, after all, chances are you probably want to be able to tweak a little bit. Let's see if it works. Tweak a little bit. Let's see if it works. It's generally speaking a good way to do development, and this supports that. So I said artists. So let's say artists, and you'll notice that I kind of was making sure that everything was going to work earlier. So let's go in and say artists, and
that was too much code to do in one shot without having something go wrong. There's got to be an uppercase. It should be a lowercase or something simple like that. Artists, plural, which is good. Calling app views artists, name equals artists. You're starting the regular expression. Starting with is the caret. You did do artist plural, right? Yep.
There we go.
Oh, you have a slash
This was so subtle. Yeah, I had a slash in there. And that was what threw it off. Yeah, so I had the slash in there. So my code was right. I typed in the wrong URL. So I had the slash in there. And I could go back and update my URL so that it would accept the slash. I'm not going to worry about that for right now. But that was what went wrong. I just typed in my URL incorrectly. But you'll notice, sure enough, there's hello Django. And so now let's go in and pass in a name here. So let's go ahead and zoom on in. You'll notice that I've typed in the word name. There we go. And so now let's go ahead and try that. You'll notice that it displays name. Let's go ahead and say hello Django, hit enter, and it doesn't like my spaces.
I was going to say, I suspect it doesn't like the spaces in the URL.
Yeah, because the reason is that wasn't part of my pattern. My pattern didn't say to allow spaces. So what I'm going to do is just get rid of my spaces, hello Django, and now you'll notice that it's hello Django. So it is in fact executing that pattern there, and since I didn't include spaces, it's not going to put spaces in there. I could include spaces if I wanted to. A \S is white space, that would work. If I wanted underscores, I could put an underscore in there. And you start to see where all of that is going. But the real takeaway there is the fact that I can set up my routing. I get to control what the URLs are going to look like. And if I want to be able to very easily read something from that URL and capture it inside of my view code, I have that ability.
Could you just take a minute and just go back to that original URL that you typed in with the hello Django message and show which URL it matched, sort of flow through the routing, and then go to the method. Just quickly follow that code through one more time.
So here's the way that it winds up coming together is it's going to read through all of my patterns. And actually, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to do this. So here's my little error message. And so you'll notice that it actually tells us exactly what it wound up doing behind the scenes. So it said, using the URL defined in music store URLs, Django tried these URL patterns in this order. So it tried looking for just the word artists. Well, we didn't use just the word artists. We have a / there. So that is not a match. Then it said, all right, well, let me try with / artists, and then that parameter, this is the important part right here of that parameter, it needs to have letters afterwards. It needs to have letters afterwards. And so it's going to fail because I have a / but I have no letters there, so it doesn't match there. So that's the order in which it's being applied. So the first one is going to match if I just do artists. And then the second one is going to match if I do artists and then hello Django or some bit of text afterwards. So that's how it's all walking through there.
Cool.
Cool. All right. So with that, let's go ahead and take 10. And we'll come on back and we'll take a look at how we could do some more advanced HTML and also how we could start to allow for changes to be made to our data.
See you soon.
Apparently.